You're joining us tonight on NewsNation to break down the next steps in the push for President Trump's impeachment is University of Missouri law professor Frank Bowman. Mr. Bowman is a former deputy district attorney, deputy chief of the Southern Criminal Division at the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Florida, and also the author of the book High Crimes and Misdemeanors, A History of Impeachment for the Age of Trump. Mr. Bowman, thank you for your time here on NewsNation tonight. I'd like to dig into your constitutional knowledge here for a moment because, as I said, there's a lot of moving parts here, and I think everybody's trying to wrap their mind around the possibility and how some different things could play out. So beginning with the 24 hours that Vice President Pence has been given by Speaker Pelosi to invoke the 25th Amendment, is the Vice President required to respond here?
No, he's not required. Plainly, this is an effort to draw his attention more acutely to the desires of the House, in particular, that he do this. But he certainly doesn't have to act. He could, but he's not obliged to.
It does sound unlikely, but what we know at this point is many Democrats and also some Republicans are throwing the kitchen sink at President Trump. A vote in the House on impeachment could happen, as Joe just said, on Wednesday. When and how fast could a trial in the Senate take place?
Well, one of the things that we learned during the disputes in the first Trump impeachment was that both chambers of Congress have control, really much very absolute control over their own rules. They can move as fast as they want to, as long as they have a sufficient majority to do so. I think practically speaking, a trial of President Trump could not occur until after the Biden inauguration. There are a variety of reasons for that, but the most obvious one is that until the inauguration, the Republicans will remain in effective control of the agenda of the Senate. And that's because even if and when, or if, well, rather when, the two newly elected Georgia senators are sworn in, the balance of the Senate would only be 50-50. The vice president wouldn't have been sworn in yet to cast the tie-breaking vote to pass the baton from Mitch McConnell over to a new majority leader, and therefore Mitch McConnell can continue to control the House, or rather the Senate agenda. And that being so, Senator McConnell has already said that he foresees no possibility of a trial before the 20th. So practically speaking, a trial will occur sometime after the 20th.
Constitutionally speaking, what do you make of some who say it will be difficult to do so, interfering with the confirming of the cabinet while you're also trying to impeach? Is that possible?
Well, there are two questions. One is the constitutional question. Can you try any officer, including a president, after he's left office? And the answer, I think, is surely you can. There is precedent for that proposition, as well as I think it fits very well with the structure of the constitutional impeachment provisions, including the penalty provision that provides for one of the possible penalties being disqualification from serving in office in the future. So certainly it can be done. In terms of the question of whether or not it would necessarily interfere with the early operations of the Biden administration, certainly it would slow things down, because the Senate would, as the President-elect Biden said on the clip that you played, at a minimum, they'd have to split their attention between a Senate trial and confirmations of his nominees. Now, I have to say that I don't entirely credit the notion that somehow or other this is going to bog down the Senate for months at a time. I think that's very unlikely. I think both parties, for differing reasons, are going to have incentives to want to move this to a conclusion in fairly short order. The Democrats want to move things along so that they can get onto the agenda, the post-Trump agenda. And I'm not sure that the Republicans really want to spend many days defending Mr. Trump's conduct on January the 6th or in the weeks leading up to it.
You brought up disqualification and removal from office. Of course, just one penalty of impeachment. The other, as you said, is disqualification from holding another office in the future. When the framers included this in the Constitution, what was their intent behind it? And also, how can it be applied, disqualification?
Let me start with the last question first. Once the Senate, assuming a Senate were to convict Mr. Trump or any other officer, there is then a second vote on the question of whether or not disqualification should be applied. The Senate precedent is that disqualification occurs on a majority vote. So you have 2/3 vote to convict, but after conviction, only majority is required for disqualification. And practically speaking, in Mr. Trump's case, the main point would be that if he were disqualified, he couldn't run for the presidency again in 2024. Beyond that, the reason for the framers having put this in the Constitution is, I think, that they were concerned about two things when they were dealing with officers, particularly the president, when they wrote the impeachment clause. And when they were writing the impeachment clauses, they were principally focused on the president. Certainly impeachment applies to other people, but they were really thinking about the president. And they were concerned about the real possibility that at some point in the future, you might have a president whose behavior was so dangerous to democratic order that you could fairly think of him as a dangerous demagogue and someone who, for the good of the republic and for the safety of the democracy, simply needed to be excluded from public life, at least insofar as that included service in the federal government. That's plainly what they were thinking about when they included this remedy. And I think Democrats would argue, and I think I probably would agree, that Mr. Trump is, in some sense, the person, the embodiment of the figure that they were thinking about.
Frank Bowman, law professor at the University of Missouri. We're out of time, but I appreciate you spending a little of your time tonight with us here on NewsNation. Thank you.
My pleasure.